Professor Eric Carlson, Albany, New York. I'm a therapist and a professor of psychology at a local college. It's fine. Once we get going, I'm fine.
All right. So if I ask you a question, try to incorporate my question in your answer.
Okay, yeah, I did this with Harold too.
And if you something you don't want to answer, just say. If there's something you want to redo. We just go back and forth.
Yeah, right, sure.
All this gets
Edited, yeah.
We can do anything we want. All right. You want to start with your book?
Well, this is not my book. It's Lisa's book. I wrote a chapter in the book, so we can start a little bit talking about that, about biker culture, and I can just talk a little bit about that.
Still, that's a unique book, Bill, on the American biker culture. None has ever been written, and it's done locally, and he's in the book, writing about the psychology of corruption with politics, etc.
All right. Well, let's talk about that. Tell me about your chapter and a little more about the book.
Okay, well, the book is called The Gloves Come Off. It's a book by Lisa Petroselli, and it's really about the American biker culture. She's interviewed a number of different bikers, asked a lot of different questions, and been involved with them over a course of many years. And so she really got kind of a unique glimpse into the culture and the whole variety and diversity of stories. I wrote a chapter in the book. I was asked to write a chapter about based on looking at a threat assessment report that was issued by the FBI, I believe in 2011, March of 2011, something along that line. So I took some time, as a scientist, as a professor who critically thinks, and I looked at the data and looked at the report, and it was really a pretty confusing report, because one of the things that it strived to do right off the bat was to lump the biker culture and biker motorcycle clubs in with gangs. And they're clearly like horses of a different color. I mean, clubs are designed to provide some sense of camaraderie. You have to have, legal charter to open a club. There's a fee associated with it. It's sanctioned. While gangs are primarily associated with unsanctioned behavior, criminal behavior. They're criminal enterprises. So for them to try to merge those definitions together, I thought made the report immediately biased. But what was most interesting was there were some statistics that were reported, although some of the definitions were a little bit hazy, but there was some statistics that were reported about the estimate of different groups around the country and whether or not they produced some kind of a criminal threat to the health and well-being of communities. And in the report itself, it estimated that biker clubs actually posed a very slight threat, very small, minuscule threat in the bar graphs and the statistics. But later on in the report, it went on to say that these clubs actually, offer or pose a much more significant threat. So it was sort of the statistics they reported were completely contradictory to what their overall summary was of the report. And what's interesting is that in a number of surveys that have been done in local communities, more than 2/3, like 65% of community members, just don't see biker clubs as any kind of threat to their well-being. And so I kind of asked myself, well, given the fact that most of the statistics and community perception is that these groups are really not proposing any threat, those that think that they're a threat are like a very minute amount of people that are really not statistically significant. I try to answer the question, well, what's happening here? What are the underpinnings of this kind of belief system? What might be the psychology behind it? And so I guess what I started to believe is that as an individual who teaches and researches areas in social psychology, it's kind of a basic premise around stereotyping. The law community, the criminal justice community, is sort of like they're the marshals in town. They're the in-group. They're the group that wants to maintain a level of control. And they see the biker clubs, or actually other kinds of clubs that look a little bit different, that seem to have an independent streak in them, as being members of an outcast outgroup. They see those groups as a threat, even though there isn't any concrete evidence to produce them as a threat. So I think what they have done, a lot of the court systems and criminal justice systems, they have perpetuated these stereotypes, these mythologies around bikers. You know, it's sort of like the Wild Ones with Marlon Brando, or, you know, some of these recent television shows that portray bikers as violent, you know, more than rebellion, but violent, aggressive kinds of people. And, you know, when you look at television programs that are on some of the cable shows, they always highlight criminal activities of biker groups and call them gangs. And a lot of these incidents occurred not even in this country, in like Canada, and are far removed from this area. And before I even wrote this report, I really hadn't had much contact with biker groups, so I didn't really have any kind of bias. But, you know, clearly the statistics do not match up with the threat, or the assessment of the threat. And so I think it's really an attempt by certain institutions to want to be, first of all, maintain their sense of control and power, that they're the ones that are in charge. And also, of course, you know, programs like yours and websites have brought much more vocal scrutiny to the behavior of judges, of people in the criminal justice system, and I think it makes them feel uncomfortable. So in that situation, you need a real handy scapegoat that maybe the community is not easily going to support. And let's face it, on the surface, bikers look a little dangerous. They wear dark clothing. Some of them have tattoos and piercings. You know, their motorcycles are loud. But so what? You know, this is supposed to be the land of the free, the home of the brave. We're supposed to be able to, and in psychology, be ourselves, express who we are through our clothing, through our recreational activities. As long as they're not interfering with the rights of other people, that's what America's supposed to be about. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's the case. If someone is put into a stereotype outgroup, it doesn't matter whether they're following the rules or not. The case is built against them, and the public is kind of recruited. And the more you hear something over and over and over again, even when you hear information to the contrary, it's hard to kind of wipe the slate clean. And so I think everybody looks at the bikers through, to some degree, this broad brush lens that has been painted, I think, to a large degree by the media, but certainly in the support of the criminal justice system. And, you know, it's something that we have to change. I mean, again, the diversity of cultures in this country is supposed to have been the strongest aspect of American culture. You know, we hear the term the melting pot. Yes, we're all different, but we're all Americans. And that, to me, I think has really been called into question, especially over the last 15 to 20 years. But there's certainly many examples of this in the biker culture.
You know, I think everything that I've ever heard that was negative about a biker would be in a movie or a TV show. I'm trying to sit and remember if I saw a news story or read an article in the paper. I think it's movie stuff.
Yeah, I think that I think you're right. I don't really hear that much about these kinds of incidents. But even if you do, it's one of these sorts of things that if a biker gets in trouble, you probably will hear about it. It'll be front and center because it's something that people believe will be the case. It's sort of like, you know, when my 9-year-old used to believe it was unsafe to fly on an airplane. Why? Because when an airplane crashes, it's big news. So as a 9-year-old brain thinks, geez, this is more likely to happen, and it's safer to be in a car. Well, it isn't safer to be in a car statistically, but we can sometimes be led to believe that because we hear about these things. The same thing is certainly true with people who suffer from some form of mental disorder. Anytime somebody does and they commit a violent act, it's front and center that they have this mental illness. And so the public starts to make that association, thinking that people with mental illnesses are much more likely to be violent than the rest of the public and the rest of the population. And that's just false. You know, it's a mythology. But, you know, we've been told to believe in a lot of mythologies. And certainly the one that, you know, bikers are violent and aggressive people is one of those.
Let me ask you a hypothetical.
Okay.
If you were black,
Mm-hmm.
would you want to be a member of the Highwaymen?
You know, I don't even know how to answer that because I don't, you know, I guess I don't know enough about the biker culture. But, you know, my guess is that there are, you know...
You kind of have two strikes against you before you ever
Yeah,
start.
well, you know, the thing
yeah.
is that there's a lot of, you know, biker groups oftentimes are, I think, my assessment, are populated by people that, you know, do feel like they have some things in common and understanding. But even within that group, there is a lot of diversity. So, I mean, I don't even know if I feel really qualified to answer that question, but I know that there
It's
are...
a question from the standpoint of, let's face it, racism's still alive in America in a much worse way than I ever dreamed.
Sure.
And so I believe that the prisons will bear out that if you're black, you have a much worse...
Oh, no doubt about that. I mean,
So
there's
you're black and a biker. I don't know. Are there any black bikers?
Oh yes, I believe there are a number of those kinds of groups. But you know, I think you're right. I think there's probably, you know, it's maybe two strikes against you depending upon, you know, where you are and you know, I mean, you're from the South, and they say the South has changed, but you know, and I know that it hasn't really changed that much. You know, it's a one thing to sort of have some, you know, public statements or some laws on the books, but then when it comes down to real justice, I think you go into the communities and talk to people to see if it's changed, and a lot of times people say, no, it isn't. And the North is not necessarily any better. But, you know, I don't even always think it's a matter of race. I think it's a matter of difference. You know, when people are trying to express themselves in different ways and they look different, it can be a threat to people. And I think in some ways, I mean, you can get into this in kind of a complicated intellectual way, but there's so many disparities between people with the recession and, you know, the class differences and things like that. I think all the fear and anxiety in some ways has cultivated this new sort of mentality of tribalism where people want to just be kind of with their own kind or who they perceive as their own kind, and because they feel others are threatening them. And you know, I think there's a complicated set of reasons for why that's true, but certainly when you look at the concentration of wealth in this country and it's in the hands of a very few families and 90% of the people have 4% of the wealth, you can understand why there's some frustration and the need to probably bond together in some ways. It's, I think, a basic fact of evolution that we try to bond with people that we think are safe and will support our well-being. Stay away from those we perceive as not, even if they really pose no threat to us. You know, it's in times of fear and uncertainty, I read one time, people tend to rally around conservative leadership. And you know, what does that mean? That means that let's go back in time. Let's not think in the present or think forward. And I think that's unfortunate when people rely on stereotypes. But I think we're all probably guilty of those biases. You have to think more about our thinking, you know. And I think that's probably what just does not at all happen in the criminal justice system. There isn't any kind of scrutiny in terms of a lot of these decisions that are being made. There's no I don't know, either motivation or no governing body that gets people to really look at the process by which they make decisions.
Is the book just chapters by different people? Does the book have a beginning, a middle, and an end?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, and here's the book again. I would say that, you know, from my reading, and I haven't read the entire book. I've skimmed, and the thing is, I've met a lot of the different individuals. It almost is like she's interviewed people, she's asked questions, and they're like personal narratives, personal stories. And I think that as you look at each one of them, you know, you have different individuals in terms of the way that they look and their backgrounds, but what comes across in terms of their discussing the biker clubs is that there's this brotherhood, there's this sort of, you know, interwoven or interconnection between the members of the club. They look out for one another, you know, they support each other, just like a family would. It almost becomes a family environment. And many of the people that are drawn to some of the biker clubs, are people that have been disenfranchised. They may have been people that have served in the military. They may have been people that have been in law enforcement, but maybe they've seen the hypocrisy and the corruption in a lot of those systems, or maybe they've been mistreated, lied to, and they're very disillusioned about that. And oftentimes people, I think, to some degree, have a restlessness inside them. So riding the bike, there's a sense of freedom. But all the stories I also read is that, riding a motorcycle is dangerous. One of the main reasons it's dangerous is because cars don't oftentimes pay attention to other bikers on the road. And that's often why they ride together in groups. It's not as a means of intimidation, it's a means of protecting themselves to ride in groups. When we were coming over, you could see how they were very synchronized with the riding to make sure that we got there safely. And that, to me, is almost a metaphor. They work together in synchronicity. And, you look at a lot of the aspects of how they work together and communicate and support each other. It really has the positive elements of family that oftentimes people are missing. So I think people that feel disenfranchised are drawn. I think it's kind of healthy to be drawn to groups where you're not isolated and alone, where you're supported. You don't necessarily even have to talk, you just feel like you're part of something.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Had you been around the group before today?
One other time, because I was, I had met Hank a number of years ago, and I was familiar with his work, but he was more an investigative reporter and not, more like, although he rode a motorcycle and had associations, I was familiar with Hank. But it was only just recently that I went to one of the biker club outings. It was for a book signing, and that I kind of mingled. Now, I tend to see myself as a fairly open-minded individual. But, having said that, when I first walked in, it felt like a little sense of anxiety and intimidation. But that really just sort of abated very, very quickly, because people were just very friendly. They came right up to me. They said, "Hey, I read your chapter. I really appreciated, your research." And so, if anything, I felt tremendously welcomed right off the bat and felt at ease. And I think that the author of the book, Lisa Petroselli, had the same experience. And she was originally kind of an outsider and was asking questions to groups that oftentimes when they're asked questions, it's more of an interrogation, So she spent time with them and gained their trust. And, her sentiments in the book were that, boy, those stereotypes are really way off, because I've spent several years with these folks and I just haven't seen any of that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, just like any group. We have teachers that break the law. We have nurses. I'm working I was involved in another documentary, which we're talking about nurses and healthcare professionals. There's a very small percentage, but there are some that don't behave ethically and harm their patients. Does that mean that we think all healthcare professionals are bad and evil and are only drawn to the profession to take advantage of other people? No. So, I think that anytime you look at any group of individuals or any members in society, there's going to be some that involve themselves in unhealthy activities or in criminal behaviors, all right? And that's just, just by, probability that will occur. But I know my experience has been that's not the theme of a biker club. That's not the purpose. Purpose is camaraderie, brotherhood, support. I just haven't had the experience of any kind of criminal enterprising. I just haven't. But that's my opinion.
Describe what happened today when we pulled off the interstate until we got here.
Well, there was a real, it's almost kind of hard to capture it in words, but I know that it was a presence. There was a presence of men in their leather jackets and their motorcycles. And, as we started to move forward and travel, you felt like you were encircled, almost like a flock of geese, and they were leading the way, and you felt some sense of security. And it was fascinating to me how people kind of knew what their role is. People went ahead, people fell behind, people were flanking, like you had your all of these folks. It was really a fascinating experience and feeling. Very much felt protected.
And I'm sure you realize nobody ever said a word to us.
Right.
We exited the toll booth. The bikers saw us, and then they just swept us up, and we were off.
That's right. That's
there were
right.
people behind us, on the side of us, in front of us, and I loved how
It's almost, yeah.
somebody pulled out to protect as we were turning left. If other cars were coming from the other direction.
Mhm.
Just it was apparently just instinctive. I don't know.
I mean, it's almost like you see somebody vulnerable or whatever, like you would just pick up a baby or however it would be. But there was a sense of, being protected and guided in a way that it really was, again, it's almost hard to use words to describe it, but you felt a sense of reverence for the level of cooperation and synchronicity it took with people that you had not even met yet, and yet they took care of you.
And all of this is important to what we're here, the main story we're filming about, because it makes it even more understandable why Tyler immediately came to the rescue of his brother.
Exactly.
His brother in the club.
And
any of them would have done that. They all would have
absolutely,
done that.
as a matter of like loyalty, honor, and a basic sense of love. I mean, that is something that is so deeply embedded within our ability to survive as human beings. If anything, people that don't come to defend the people that they supposedly love, you'd almost have to question whether those relationships are real. The relationships I have had an opportunity to observe here are very deep, real connections. And, certainly we also have a legal right to be able to defend ourselves when we're under physical harm and we have not provoked that physical harm. We obviously have the legal right to be able to defend ourselves. But, it's an instinct in every human being to want to survive and to want the people that they care about, cherish, and love to survive too. So, I think anybody in that situation. I know all kinds of people who have been in situations where their kids were pushed or threatened. And, your instinct, like you're the mother bear or the father bear, is to protect the younger cubs and, to protect any members, of the family. That's absolutely a natural human instinct, and there's nothing criminal about that.
I was in a fraternity in college. No question. Any fraternity brother, probably of any fraternity, but definitely of mine, if they'd seen something like that happen to Joey, or if it had been me, they'd have been there in a heartbeat. It never would have crossed their mind. If you're a parent, you might think about it for a second, but in that case, just as instinctive as it is for the biker, it's a similar situation. It's like a family. So we certainly can't find any fault at all with Tyler for jumping in there to protect his deaf friend who's got 4 on top of him.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because his friend was even more vulnerable because of his disability, and so there's already that built-in connection that I'm kind of going to watch over this friend of mine a little bit more carefully, and know that if someone is involved with something, maybe they don't know that he has a disability. I think that certainly factors into the case, and that's why I think it's such an extraordinary miscarriage of justice that they didn't even consider the area of disability. In so many situations we spend an inordinate amount of time, and I support this kind of stuff, making sure that people can enter a building because they have a disability, and yet in this situation, when someone's screaming at you, at your back, and you don't see them, and you can't hear, you can't respond. You cannot respond to that. So the idea that somehow the fact that he wasn't responding made someone angry enough to want to attack him is completely unjustified, and even more unjustifiable once all the facts came through that he in fact had this disability. And this is all on a tape too. It's not something that's just sort of eyewitness information. It's pretty crystal clear what is happening on the tape, the surveillance tape that was in the bar at the time. Most people that have viewed it, that have some kind of sense of objectivity, feel like it's pretty much a slam dunk what happened with that.
You know, unfortunately, all too often in our courts, whether it's civil court or criminal court, it's now that you're guilty unless you happen somehow to prevail and become innocent.
Yeah.
The deck is stacked against you, and certainly these prosecutors utilize pleas that make it, people get scared to death and they're innocent, and they end up, in this case, like the guys took a plea, they'd have been crazy not to.
Yeah. You know what?
But now they're saddled with being convicted felons.
I have a little bit of a take on what I think happened in this situation. You know, think about it. There was obviously some stress that was occurring amongst the people that were the owners of this bar that were associated with starting the fight. There was something happening that was completely independent of this incident. Okay, and because as a therapist, I've seen these incidents before. I saw an incident where somebody thought that they were throwing something at the person's car, and the guy got out of the car and confronted somebody, and a lot of it was because he was having trouble with his own teenage son, and he just kind of displaced that anger. And my feeling is that, you know, he's calling this guy's name out, and the guy doesn't answer. And so his mind is saying, well, he's not answering because he's being disrespectful to me. And he keeps saying it even louder, and it feels like it's even more disrespect. And obviously the person who is the owner is a person that has some sense of need for power and control and authority. Well, and then they get into the whole fight situation, and lo and behold, even though these bikers have been beat up and the police come, they don't even want to press charges. All right? So you would think, geez, case is closed. Boy, they could have pressed charges against us. They're not doing that. But the thing is that oftentimes people that are very associated with power and control, they think somebody else is going to behave the way that they would. So there probably was this deep-seated fear saying, oh boy, we better cover ourselves here. Maybe later on they'll talk to their friends and they'll say, well, what really happened? And you guys should go back and press charges. So I think that they concocted this whole thing just as a means of protecting themselves. And it really got out of control. But, you know, once something gains momentum, a lie or conspiracy gains momentum, and there's some people involved in it, you know, you just pull in as many other people as you can to just keep it going. And it's really a travesty, you know. As they always say, the crime itself is never what's the worst thing. It's the cover-up or the conspiracy associated with this. And again, the bikers were the ones that were the victims, and they weren't even willing to press charges. They didn't even have to press charges. So it really could have just ended right there as a misunderstanding, shake hands, geez, let's, you know, but that's sometimes where, you know, when people are connected to the system and they have some, you know, investment or some agenda, or they're owed a favor or someone's owed something, that's when things really, really get out of whack. And that you know, I mean, that's at least a theory. I mean, I can't say that, you know, I have total factual information, but that's my take on it. That's what I think happened.
Should there be a mechanism that would allow somebody who has to take a plea to revisit it, especially when they've got a tape like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I think that...
Give me that as a soundbite, if you would.
Absolutely.
I would
say the question.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Okay. When there is when there is information that clearly proves and documents that a crime was not committed and would exonerate people, should a plea be able to be revisited? Absolutely. Because there are so many situations where people are under pressure, they're coerced. Sometimes the interrogation process, people are deprived of going to the bathroom, having a glass of water. They use all kinds of different techniques. You know, maybe the goal or the intention is to get at the truth. I don't think that was the case here, but I know of a number of situations where they've used interrogation techniques designed to get at the truth, and all they did was stress someone's brain to the point where they would have just admitted to doing anything, you know? So absolutely. I mean, that's why and I don't even know if there's any sense of independent scrutiny that exists in our country or around the world anymore, but these systems need to be independently scrutinized because they're really becoming toxic. Just like, we don't want a restaurant, serving spoiled meat or having, food delivered that is, that's tainted by the growers. I mean, that's just good business. If a small restaurant owner serves something and it gets somebody sick because the food inspector was paid off, and of course these things happen, no one goes to that restaurant again. And the same thing is true in these kinds of situations, is that, when you unjustly, convict people, that spreads throughout the families and the community that's affected by that. And it creates a real sense of distrust in institutions. And ultimately, that's just never a good thing. It's just not a positive thing. It can never lead to anything good. So there needs to be some kind of independent scrutiny of these systems. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's not about justice, it's about politics. Politics is what's, politics and power, that's what are the operating principles in a lot of these systems. I'll do you a favor because I'm looking to achieve some kind of status, some kind of monetary liberation, something. But rarely does it seem to ever be about justice. And of course, the court system is overcrowded. There's a lot of different cases. But you think about this case, in an overcrowded system to begin with, for them to bring this case is just a waste of community resources, an absolute waste. And of course, the impact on the family and the children and everybody is really the real tragedy.
Well, we proposed to the New York legislature, as we're doing to every state, 48 proposals for amendments to their laws or new laws if needed. And kind of the key issue is the creation of special regulatory grand juries where a case like this could be brought to them.
Right.
And say, look, it's when the government does wrong. The government did wrong in this case. And I don't know that there's much chance in, where of anybody doing it, but in New Hampshire, they have the House of Representatives has created something where they look at cases and make a determination of whether the government was right or not. And it's almost 100%. I don't know what the statistic is, but it's overwhelming of them looking at these different cases, many of which are family court, and determining that absolutely the people were wronged and that they have a term for it. I don't remember. It's a kind of a strange term, but when you sit and realize it, it's like it's not upheld, but it's something like that. They uphold the petitioner, the wronged person, presenting their story. So it's the only state I know of that has it.
Those kinds of ideas are especially important for oversight, I believe, of smaller communities, where those interrelationships can have a large impact on whether justice is done. I mean, that's why, obviously, there's situations where people, attorneys will request a change of venue because they don't think a person in a particular area can get a fair shake or a fair trial because there's already been information in the media that's biased anyone against making an objective decision. And obviously that's oftentimes where you need a high-powered, expensive attorney to be able to accomplish that. But it seems as though some outside scrutiny where there isn't some vested interest in what the outcome is. And that's the thing, is that people can appear as though there's no vested interest in the outcome. But when you kind of take a look at, this person, you have this association, and, when you dig deep, you see that there is. And, even by appearances, I mean, in the small towns, there's a lot of difficulty with that kind of thing, and those sort of like little favors that happen behind the scenes can result in these kinds of tragic injustices.
All right, let's shift gears.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to talk about next? Monsanto?
Yeah,
or family court or what?
Let's talk about Monsanto. Yeah.
All right, take it away. Have you seen Food Inc.?
No, I haven't. I've seen a bunch of stuff, but I actually.
Monsato's in it.
Yeah, well, I have actually watched halfway through a documentary by a woman from France, actually, although it's narrated by an English-speaking person. And it's fascinating. It's called The World According to Monsanto. Fascinating, but frighteningly fascinating is the word that I would use to describe that.
Well, watch Food Inc. It'll change the way you think about eating.
Well, I already do a little bit of, if not, I do a bit of, shopping at farm markets and buying local, and I've always supported that. But that also goes against, the habits of convenience. I'll just run around to the supermarket. That's you got to make a little bit more of an effort. But you know what? The effort is worth it. The food supply is something I'm really, really worried about, and I tend to try to eat relatively healthy. But my goodness, when we can't even know, we're not even allowed to have the freedom to know what ingredients are in our food.
Or in the soil.
Or in the soil.
Or in the leaves.
Exactly.
And Monsanto is there.
Well,
I was talking to some people, I interviewed some people about this subject, and I'm saying, ever since watching Food Inc., my wife and I always go to the organic section. They said, don't do that. I said, what do you mean? What can I eat? They said, you got to grow it yourself.
Yeah, well, I think that's the way things are moving, and that's not a bad thing. My family always, as a kid growing up, my family had gardens. I'm a pretty avid gardener, although recently I haven't done as much. But agencies that serve homeless people and that serve the underprivileged, they're growing their own community gardens right now, and those are some of the positive kinds of approaches, co-ops and things like that. And because we just can't trust some of the food that's out there. Speaking of the company Monsanto, I have got involved in researching them and reading and getting involved for a number of different years. My father was a research chemical engineer at Monsanto in the late 1940s, right after the Second World War. He served in the South Pacific as a commander in the Navy. And afterwards, he had already graduated. He actually volunteered and joined the Navy. And he, as a result, served longer because he signed up as opposed to being drafted. But he had already graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in chemical engineering. And he was one of kind of a few select people that started working on research related to a series of products that have really changed our lives, some for the better, some not so much. But he was involved in discovering some of the processes by which we make plastics. At that time it was called polystyrene, but he held, I think, over 30 patents for Monsanto Corporation with his research work. And he worked at a plant based in Springfield, Massachusetts, the Indian Orchard Plastics plant. And that's really, Monsanto, it's interesting, they if you go to their website, they call themselves an agricultural industry. But really, they've been a chemical and plastics company for many years. They make herbicides. They were the company that made Agent Orange, not a very positive product. But getting back to the Springfield plant, my father worked there for about 13 or 14 or 15 years, and in the late 1950s, maybe even the middle 1950s, Monsanto and other companies that worked together with Monsanto, supplying a lot of the things they needed to make the plastics, like Dow Chemicals, and there was a variety of other ones. There was some pretty compelling research that was being done in the laboratory saying that the polyvinyl chloride and vinyl chloride, which are the polymers associated with plastic, that when people are exposed to that, in a certain, I think it was 500 parts per million, they were doing studies at that point, with rats and mice. They were discovering that these things were producing all kinds of health problems. Cancers, especially liver cancer, but cancer of the lung, all kinds of cancers at that time. And yet, none of this information was made to any of the employees at any of these plants in Alabama, in Georgia, not in Springfield. The only risk that they said that these substances pose were that they were very flammable, and yes, they were. In fact, many plants are producing plastics, so they were saying, the only real threat here is if the stuff catches on fire because it's flammable. But other than that, just being around it, there is no threat. And we now know today that that's absolutely not the case. But, just like with the tobacco companies that had research going way, way back into the 1950s, they knew nicotine was an addicting drug. They knew that it was causing a series of health hazards. But that information was suppressed for many, many years. And I would say that this, the health consequences of exposure to some of the chemicals that Monsanto has been involved in is much more widespread than the smoking epidemic. But anyway, I just remember growing up as a kid, some of the people that my father would be involved with, and I would hear, oh, geez, this person died, or they're sick, or they have cancer, and it seemed like there was sort of a pattern as a kid. But in 1970, when I was 11 years old, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had a routine physical exam. He had a shadow on the X-ray of his lung. They went in. He had a tumor. They removed it. They thought that they had got it all. But the tumor was an unusual tumor. He was treated at Strong Hospital in Rochester, which is a leading research hospital in New York State, very, very well respected, and they were kind of ahead of the curve in the treatment of cancer. As we talk, my mother is involved in trying to get some of the medical records, but I have really felt for a long time that there was a clear association between his exposure to working with plastics. I mean, my mother used to say, oh gosh, he'd come home from work, his hair would smell, his skin seemed to give off things, but he was a hands-on guy. He was developing the physics and the chemistry behind developing these things, and he was in the plant making sure that the machines were working properly, and these things were working properly. And as a kid growing up, we had all the test products. We had like the baggies and all the plastic test products growing up as a kid. We had all those kinds of things. But in 1971, he died from the lung cancer, and it spread throughout his whole body. And it's interesting. I'm now just turned 54 years old, and it was a difficult year for me because my father died at 53, and I had this nervousness about, geez, am I going to make it further? And what's really, really intriguing, and it wasn't just the cancer, if I were to show you a picture of my father at 53 and me at 53, you would guess that maybe he's 15 years older than I am. What a significant difference. Obviously, we share the same genes, but I think that there was a premature aging process, and I've just been kind of thinking about this recently. I'd like to look back at some photographs, but I guess the thing that's so extraordinary to me about this whole Monsanto story is that, for those that are not familiar with the company, they made the product Agent Orange during the Vietnam War, a herbicide to try to clear the jungles of Vietnam. We all pretty much know that caused a lot of neurological problems, led to birth defects. They paid out a little bit of a small settlement. They also produced DDT for a while. They produced PCBs, which were found and have now been banned, but those were substances that they used as lubricants. They put them in plastics because they reduced the possibility of flammability and fire, so they thought that they were very useful. But now we have found that they don't ever break down. And so you and I and the bird you see flying in the air, we all have PCBs. It's almost like it's some kind of a weird, crazy, cruel scientific experiment about what's going to happen to all of us. We all have those in our bodies. They're making genetically engineered food. They inject, they sell this product called Roundup. And they were sued in France for fraud because they put on the label it's biodegradable. But it's not. It's not biodegradable. The same product is sold in this country. It doesn't say biodegradable, but it does in France. And yet tests show that after 30 days, only 2% of it is gone. That's hardly biodegradable. they were involved in hormones. Now, some of the products that in Monsanto and the processes that they're involved in are banned in other countries. They used a hormone that caused cows to produce a greater rate of milk that was injected into the dairy cows. That product is banned in Europe and is banned in Canada. And in fact, health officials in Canada testify that they, the Monsanto officials attempted to coerce them into, legalizing that or having their farmers use that. But the latest thing that is most frightening to me is it seems to me that their attempt to want to take over the entire food supply of the world. They've genetically engineered soybeans, where they bombard the soybeans and they genetically change the composition of the soybean such that it's immune to the effects of this Roundup pesticide. Now, on the surface, it seems like a good idea because you throw the pesticide on, it kills all the weeds, and the soybeans survive. But the soybean survive is not the same as a naturally grown soybean. It's not. And yet, there's been no scrutiny to make sure that these products are safe. And in fact, there has been a tremendous resistance to labeling products in food stores as being genetically engineered foods. It would seem to me that we have a right to know as a consumer what it is that we're eating. I mean, if anytime you add a food additive into any kind of product, it has to be labeled. But there's been a pass for Monsanto in every way. And remember, this is the company that brought us also AstroTurf that probably ruined some great running backs' knees and baseball players' knees. Agent Orange, DDT, PCPs, these terrible hormones. But, if you look in the papers and on the websites, they're fast-tracking the approval of all these new biotechnologically, genetically engineered foods. You have to ask yourself the question, why? Basically because a lot of the Monsanto officials and attorneys and directors and members who are lobbyists now work in all the most important departments of government. They're in the EPA, they're in the Department of Agriculture, they're in all the departments. The FDA are all loaded with past members of Monsanto. And they kind of go back and forth. And it's not a Republican or a Democratic issue because these people have been in the administrations of Republicans as well as Democrats. In fact, Clinton probably appointed the most ex-Monsanto employees. Unfortunately, Hillary Clinton's law firm, now I'm not sure if she ever worked on any cases, but Hillary Clinton's law firm had as one of their clients Monsanto. So it just really calls into question, what is the role of these government agencies? They're supposed to protect our health. They were supposed to protect my father's health. But it seems like it's more protecting, politicians' health. In New York State right now, there was a bill that was actually unanimously passed by both the legislation and the state senate to outlaw, as of I believe August 2014, a chemical called Tris, T-R-I-S. It's a chemical additive that's added to children's pajamas that makes them a little bit more flame retardant. Two problems. First of which is it doesn't really work that well to retard flames, but the second thing is that it's very much related to the PCB family. And in fact, it stays around and it's very much implicated in potentially being a carcinogen. So this law was passed, or this bill was forwarded, and it's now been stalled by the Senate Majority Leader in New York State. Nobody knows why, since how often does a bill get passed unanimously by both houses in Congress or in a state legislature? It's unheard of, but it somehow has been stalled. I don't even know why, but I just recently read about this information. But again, it's the chemical industry. This whole biotech industry seems to have just gotten a complete pass. And to question anything they're doing means that you're somehow anti-intellectual, you're anti-science. But the thing is, anytime any independent scientists have actually looked at the safety issues and reported the information objectively, Monsanto and other chemical companies, they don't like their findings. And these people find themselves like out on the streets looking for another job or threatened. In fact, it's pretty clear that U.S. Officials and diplomats are putting a lot of pressure and even threatening European countries that refuse to allow these genetically engineered products out on the market. In fact, September 17th of this year, 2012, there is going to be a movement called Occupy Monsanto. I recently just discovered and found out about this myself. But people and citizens are being encouraged to, and there's a website you can go to, Occupy Monsanto, where you can go to any particular plant and protest some of the things that are happening. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's, if you Google Monsanto, you watch videos. Bill Maher, I don't always agree with Bill, but I think is someone searching for the truth. He refers to them as the most evil corporation of all time. And yet, they're getting a special pass by the U.S. government with their products that are not only proven to not be safe, but there's a lot of information showing that they're very harmful to the food supply. And yet, at the very least, we as consumers should at least be given the freedom to choose and know what it is we're eating. If we want to buy a product that's genetically engineered and we don't want to do the homework to make sure it's safe, that's our right, that's our freedom. But many products we can't even tell whether they're genetically engineered or not, because the chemical industry is very much against that legislation to label these products.
Let me ask you, would you consider it to be government corruption if the government looks the other way and doesn't protect us in facilitating some corporations, we won't name them, to do things that aren't healthy and should be stopped?
Would I say that it's government corruption when government officials intentionally look the other way when they know that there's lawlessness being done? Yes and no. Yes, but I would say it's the government norm right now, which is really sad for that to come out of my mouth. But it seems as though corruption has become the norm. And, it's really, really sad because, I worked really, really hard my whole life, educating myself, getting student loans. My father was a great father. I only had him for 12 years. And had there been more scrutiny, maybe he would be around to see his grandchildren today. I know he would be proud of them. But, when the loss is really, really personal, sometimes it can bias you. But I'm a critical thinker. I've been investigating this for years, and one of my thoughts is to as a therapist, as a professor, I think that I would have never been involved or never was interested in talking about Monsanto as a means of trying to file a lawsuit, even though that maybe is something that would call some attention. But I've often thought about starting a website called Monsanto Orphans, because I think that's what we are. And I'd like to find more people out there and to see how their lives were impacted by, you lose a father at 12, that changes things. I've been fortunate enough to have a supportive family around me, and I've turned that in a positive direction. I've helped other fathers, I've formed father support groups, I've written grants through United Way to fund programs that support positive fathering. So I've tried to turn that in a positive direction. But I know when you lose a mom or a dad, your situation changes, many times not for the better. And society pays a price for that. We pay a price for single-parent households that lose economic resources and lose the support of loving parents. We pay a big price for that.
Well, hopefully the good news with Tyler is that his little boy, who we've enjoyed spending some time with tonight, won't have memories of this age. And so he'll have his dad with him in a couple more months, and he won't have that loss, I hope.
Yeah, well, I hope, there's a new opportunity to be reunited. And, the thing is that, people who are connected to injustice and loss, you know, in some ways, even though that's painful and difficult, it helps them either remind them or helps them reclaim their humanity. And, you know, having just met you, Bill, I know that that's what is driving you, is that you have this connection to a tremendous amount of people. And that's what I've done my entire life, you know. I've been a teacher, I've been a helper, I've been a therapist. Not always necessarily appreciated, you know, haven't gotten rich doing it, but there's just something I've been compelled to do. And I've gotten, in recent years, really disillusioned that those of us that have decided to do that are being the ones that are demonized. You know, teachers, it's a tough time to be a teacher right now because somehow we're being blamed for a lot of things that we have very, very little control over. And it's kind of like, you know, walk a mile in my shoes before you make a judgment. And, you know, I try to do that with other people. That's why, you know, I was honored to write the chapter in the biker book, even though, you know, frankly, the times I've been on a motorcycle were somewhat frightening to me, but that's because I went on with my older cousin who drove his Norton bike 110 miles an hour, and I was 13 years old, and when I got off, I was just glad to be alive. So, but I think I'd try it again, but it's been a long enough time in between. I think I'd have the courage to try it again, but it's courageous to ride a bike.
I'll never forget the first time I rode a little scooter. It was in like 4th or 5th grade. And the scooter headed off without me. I don't know that I could deal with one of these big bikes.
Yeah.
They sure are gorgeous to look at.
They sure are, yeah.
All right, I think we should call it a wrap.
Okay.
We can get into some of the family court stuff. Is there anything you want to talk about there, or anything else with the fathering initiatives you're involved with?
No, I think this is probably pretty good right now. Maybe if I hope we're going to have the pleasure to work again, and you know, be a little more thoughtful about that. But.
All right, we'll do it. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it really has.